Hi, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. LogRocket provides AI-first session replay and analytics, which surface the UX and technical issues impacting user experiences. Try it for free and start understanding where your users are struggling at logrocket.com. Hey, everybody. I am your host today, Paige Niederinghaus, and I am joined by my co-host, Noel Minchow. And today we have Alexander Lichter, DevRel at VoidZero, here to talk about Rolldown, how Vite bundles at the speed of Rust. Welcome to the show, Alexander.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, happy to be on PodRocket, and I'm curious what we'll talk about all. There's so much to cover.
VoidZero has really been making a lot of news lately with the creation of the company and your kind of focus on making the bundling and building ecosystem better and more unified. So this is really going to be an exciting one.
Absolutely. It's so funny because a year ago, I was sitting like exactly on the opposite where you are right now, interviewing Avenue during like ViewFest Japan during conference when he just announced VoidZero, and how the tables have turned. And now I joined the company as a DevRel, and yeah, I'm really excited to talk more about it.
Absolutely. If we're going to talk about what you talked about at some of the conferences, it's how Vite is transforming bundling and how you're making it better with rewriting everything in Rust, which is what everybody's doing in the JavaScript ecosystem these days. Let's talk about how yet another bundler is kind of a common critique. It seems, like I said, everybody is rewriting their tools. There's lots of different bundlers to choose from. So how does Rolldown really set itself apart from Rollup or ESBuild or any of the other bundlers that are coming along in the ecosystem right now?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So first of all, the typical like rewrite it in Rust, it's almost a meme nowadays, and we wouldn't do it if it wouldn't be necessary from our point of view. Rolldown is a bit of a special bundler because even though the name sounds like, oh, it's just Rollup Rustified, and it's common that people think that and say that, it's not the entire truth. The fact is that we took inspiration and also, for example, Rolldown's API, but from all the different predecessors, so to say. So we thought, okay, yeah, Rollup, it's great. The plugin ecosystem is amazing. The API is very friendly, and it's what Vite uses and extends that a little bit. And it's really good to use. So of course, we want to have compatibility. ESBuild has certain behavior and functionalities like injecting, defining variables, etc., that we also want to have there, and also certain things of correctness that Rollup might not cover in that way. And even inspiration from Webpack was drawn because, yeah, all the way, one of the good old bundlers, Webpack had really amazing features in terms of chunking optimization. So where you can decide where parts of your JavaScript should live, which files should be grouped together and generated. So we also want to offer that. And that's one of the reasons why we said, okay, we can't just say, let's contribute to one of the existing bundlers, because some of the things are simply out of scope for all of them. In addition, we also want to have features like build and hot module reload, which Vite is covering right now, but we want to have it built into the bundler, and more support for other things such as module federation. So we thought, okay, let's take all the good things that are out there, bet on the actual ecosystem API. So we want to reduce the churn for the users. Ideally, people can just switch by switching a package in the future, and you can even do it right now as a preview. And that's the whole idea. But in the end, of course, Rust helps with speed, but it's more than just Rust rewrite.
Do you think that to some extent, like Rolldown's a little bit of a victim of its own success in that like API interoperability? Because I feel like everyone makes this complaint. Then I'm always like, are you really even doing that much config anymore? There was a time when I feel like everyone had to know all of this, like all this config, and everyone was upset. It's like my team can't keep track of all these bundlers, but I feel as time goes on, I'm like, I'm using Vite, and I don't really think about my bundler that much. Have you guys found that is a component of this discourse of, is this just Rollup with a different underlying language?
I think that's definitely part of it, but I would say that's the best compliment like you could get. Say, hey, I don't know what's going on. I just use it and it works. And that's exactly what we want to get to the point with Rolldown Vite as well. So the people just use it, it all works, it's fine, the same amazing developer experience, but even faster. And then also, well, let's say eliminating parts of the weaknesses of Vite right now. Because like Vite is amazing. We switched to it because it has an unbundled dev server. But as soon as we got into the enterprise, which of course always takes a little bit to transition over there, then it starts with like, okay, we don't have like just a couple components. We have like tens of thousands of files. And then the unbundled strategy, well, it doesn't fully work in that scale. Like it's still fine, but it takes a long time to refresh the page in dev mode or to start the dev server. So also Rolldown should like work and eliminate that problem by offering a full bundle mode again. So basically what Webpack did in the past, there we go also once again, but also thanks to Rust, of course, way faster and giving the best of both worlds. For a small, medium-sized project, it will be the same speed. And for like enterprise projects right now, it will be faster than the current setup. But it's definitely a thing where people more think about Vite as the build tool. And then some people don't even know, Vite uses ESBuild under the hood for dev and like for other things like minification, and Rollup actually for the production build, because we don't dig deep into all these layers. But that's also why I'm here and try to explain these things and why things are different. And once again, thanks for having me on to shed some light on that for the listeners.
The whole idea of Vite is such a breath of fresh air after coming from working in Webpack for years and years, because I've even taken like online courses on how to do Webpack configs because it was so complicated and just difficult. So just being able to put Vite in and have it do everything else as a developer is like the best experience.
That's what we're aiming for. Yeah, I can't cut anything to that and saying that's how it should be. Only worrying about shipping features, actually, and fixing bugs here and there.
Elizabeth here, production assistant for PodRocket. We're running a listener survey to help shape future episodes and make the podcast a better experience. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes of your time, and you can find the link in the description.
You talked a little bit about the kind of inspiration and pieces that you're taking from all of these different bundlers that have come before Rolldown. So it sounds like there's an emphasis on unifying pieces of the tool chain, the bundler, the parser, the linter, and so on. Are there any risks of having too much consolidation in the ecosystem or under one team, do you think?
I think the risk is more during the development to make sure that like the whole community, the whole ecosystem at once is behind that. But I think like when Evan started the whole endeavor, it also started with Vite, right? Where it's like, okay, this was a thing, just a better developer experience for Vue, and then seeing, hey, this works for more than Vue, and then getting in touch with all the framework authors. And I think the same more or less happened with the whole like tool chain, so to say, from Rolldown to make sure all the framework authors from, I don't know, Svelte over React Router to Quick, Vue and Nuxt, etc. They're all behind it and they can all give their input on what they need, how things should work. I think this is a key part. Other than that, I think it works pretty well also in terms of contribution. Very common the risk in this consolidation is, I would say, rarely in terms of the ecosystem that like, we only have one choice, because there are tons of other like linters and bundlers out there, as we know as well. But more of like, now people have to write Rust to contribute. How would that work? And also in terms of linting, we'll talk about Oxlint, OXC, I guess in a bit. This is a common criticism, but I think we're on a good track there to make sure that people can also do it in JavaScript.
So with Rolldown aiming to match the flexibility of the Rollup plugins, how do you ensure the compatibility while also optimizing for the Rust performance?
The good thing is that we don't have to fully imagine something new. It's because there were so many tools in the past that did a lot of things very well, but not everything at once. And having an extensive test suite, of course, it helps to say, hey, there's a certain behavior. Let's take a look at how that works in Rollup or in ESBuild or maybe even in Web and see how that would fit into our scenario and how we can tweak it. For example, saying, okay, we want maybe even a different API, different options, because the options back then, they don't fit very well, but it's easy to migrate. We can just say, hey, use the old ones. It's fine. We'll set the defaults correctly. And at some point, we deprecate it and you can move over. For example, with, setting up JSX. This is way better configurable now than it was before. So I think it all matters about considering the current situation and making it, as hassle-free while still providing good defaults, and then transitioning over to something that is, for example, more powerful, more descriptive, or just works better, but without leaving the current.
How do you guys determine which plugins and like features to prioritize there? How do you keep a pulse on what people are using or have a grasp of what are the things that are causing the most pain? Like, do you guys have a vibe, or do you guys have like a data source that you monitor?
So I think a lot is really based on user feedback, because Vite powered by Rolldown is already available under the Rolldown-Vite package as a drop-in replacement for Vite. People can try it out. A lot of people did, even bigger companies did, and they reported quite some amazing numbers. There's also a repository called Rolldown Vite Perf Wins, which shows like, hey, build time before, build time after, and it's like sometimes 16x, 20x build speed improvement, which is pretty great.
Wow.
But coming back to the original question regarding the plugins, the best part is every JS plugin is compatible by default. So you can just use Rollup plugins. The most important part there is to make sure that these can be called efficiently from the Rust side. There are a few things that plugin authors even now can improve. There's a thing called plugin hook filters. So let's say there's a Rollup plugin and says, I want to transform some code. Then usually they check, hey, for example, is it a TypeScript file? If no, then do it. Don't do anything. The problem is if you check it in a function, that function has to be executed for every file. because you can't determine that. So instead, we have a hook filter regex or glob that you can define, even in Vite and Rollup, and of course also Rolldown now. And that will already work. So we have some kind of intra-op layer there that is beneficial. As soon as you use Rolldown Vite, then the function doesn't have to be called from the Rust side again and again, but we can just take that regular expression or glob and say, okay, here are the files that we include or exclude, and then match. I think that's one thing where every plugin author can do something. There's even a tracking issue in the Ecosystem Performance Initiative. It's like an initiative that tracks all like reducing dependencies, making things faster, etc. A really cool project. So that is helping a lot as well. And then when it comes to porting plugins to native, then it's about taking a look at what gives the best performance. So giving things a try, doing proof of concept, starting with the Vite native plugins, and also see what is like popular demand. For example, Rolldown can do JSX transformations out of the box. It can even do styled components. So there's a transform for that as well, just because of the popular demand. And yeah, if people are interested in certain functionalities, then it's always good to either raise an issue or if there's one, thumbing it up to see what people are interested in. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the plugin hook filters and lazy AST deserialization. How important are these kinds of low-level optimizations in building developer trust and a good experience?
I think it's pretty important because just because you rewrite things in Rust, they're not automatically performant. And that's always the thing where also people end up like, okay, it's in Rust now, but it's just 1.5 times faster. It doesn't make a big difference. So they're not like, 16 or 20 times, which is what we have right now. So the idea there, and thanks to the amazing people on the whole team, they really worked hard of thinking, okay, what are the low-level challenges and how to overcome them? So like how to make these raw plugins actually work without much overhead and also without much overhead for the developers to adapt things. Also seeing contributions from the community in a really easy way to say, okay, here's what you need. Here's how you can identify the cases, what you have to change. So also try to guide people there a bit. The whole, there's a raw transform and lazy AST deserialization. These are like very low-level optimizations to make sure that we don't have to do the same work twice. So instead of saying, okay, I have my abstract syntax tree of my code, so the technical representation, so to say, and I have that in Rust, and I have to somehow copy that over all the way into JavaScript, that's a lot of work for bigger files. So instead, we just store that in basically a shared array buffer, and we just don't do the same work twice. And for the future, same idea to say, okay, I only want to take a look at part of the abstract syntax tree, like a specific type of node, for example. That will be very nice for linting plugins. Then we can do that without, once again, doing all the work for the whole thing, but just partially. And these are very interesting concepts that really helps for performance. And we hope to bring that even further to Rolldown plugins, et cetera, to make things even faster.
These optimizations that you're doing, are they things that library or plugin authors would need to think about, or is it really just things that they'll benefit from as they're writing to work with Rolldown?
So for the lower level optimizations, that's usually something that we cover behind an API, so people don't have to worry about it and get the speed out of the box. For the plugin hook filters, that's something that either the plugin authors have to implement themselves, or as I said, contributions from the community, or we also give the option to the actual end developers to say, hey, I use a plugin, it's maybe not very well maintained, but it still works. I can apply that myself. Or for example, I have a plugin there, and for my use case, I know I can even narrow that down further to not cover, all SVG files, but only SVG files in a certain folder. So we even give that option to the developers to make their builds even faster. But I think that's most interesting for the end user in very big applications. In smaller ones, it won't make a big deal if 20 milliseconds faster or slower. And of course, as I said, for plugin authors, where we have a very big migration guide to make sure that they can cover all the things and also support Rolldown Vite and Vite at the same time. So to detect, is Rolldown Vite there? Then I want to use a different transform function, or I want to set different options, for example.
Wow, you are really trying to cover everything and everyone, and that's awesome though. That's so good.
I think that's part of the mission. We really want to make sure everybody is in and all the use cases are covered. And if not, then people should let us know. It's also so nice for everyone who submitted a feature request or bug report saying, hey, I tried it out, and in my case, it didn't work. It's always yet another point that we can improve, we can write a test case for, because there are so many options out there, and also people doing so interesting and sometimes also obscure things that you wouldn't necessarily think about it. But it's great that people test it out, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time, getting the faster builds, of course, out of that. That's also great. But yeah, just testing it and giving feedback. So if you out there think, hey, let's try that, give it a shot. Definitely worth it.
Excellent. All right. So earlier in this podcast, you talked a little bit about Oxlint and OXC. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about what it is, how it claims really big speed advantages over things like Babel and SWC and even TSC. So what are the biggest challenges that you've seen in making that speed usable and stable at scale?
It's very interesting, maybe to give a little bit of context there, because we started with like, okay, we have Vite and we want to unify the bundler. And then the point is, where do you stop? And it continues further. Like right now, yeah, we have tons of different parsers. We have different options for linting. We have different options for formatting. And the idea is eventually to have a unified JavaScript toolchain where we don't have to make all these choices. So basically, the foundation for all the things is the same. They can, for example, also reuse caches, not, oh yeah, here for that transform, I use a different tool and there's another thing doing that. And as the end user, you might not even know because you might pull in a plugin. Let's say you pull in the React compiler. React compiler uses Babel. So then you have Babel automatically in. That sadly won't change until a Rust-based React compiler comes out. There's an open issue about it, and I hope that will happen in the future just for the speed gains and aligning with all the tools. But sometimes these are things that you don't know as someone just shipping features and fixing bugs and doing amazing work because nobody dives that deep into the toolchain. But yeah, to building some kind of bundler, you want to have a foundation. And that is OXC, the Oxidation JavaScript compiler. And the idea is basically all the things you need from parsing, resolving the modules, from transforming as well. So like syntax lowering, also JSX, etc., based on the browser target. Minifying, also very important for a production grade bundle. And then more interesting for the end users, once again, a linter, Oxlint, and a formatter. Rolldown is using part of these things. Funnily, even other tools like Webpack consider to using the OXC parser over things like Acorn because it's way faster. So great to see that this is really in the spirit of open source, getting adoption across the ecosystem. That's the idea. You can use all of these separately or as part of a bundler. And then, of course, for the linter, yeah, you can use it in your projects right now. You can convert your ESLint config all the way over to it. We have a migration script, and the speed gains are compared to plain ESLint. Without type-aware linting is always important to mention, like 50 to 100 times faster in benchmarks. So that's pretty nice, I would say. For all the other tools as well, we have benchmarks for all of them. So we just don't throw numbers up there. We want to make sure they're thorough and tested. So also if we say, oh yeah, we have the fastest parser that is fully correct, then we back that with actual numbers. Link to the benchmarks are on OXC.rs and probably also in the show notes. For Oxlint directly, I think the biggest steps that happened recently is the dreaded type-aware linting, which is often the problem, let's say, when it comes to like slow linting. Because very often you have rules on from TypeScript ESLint, and they're important, but they need type information. So you have to run the TypeScript compiler, of course. So you have to like infer the types, do all the work, and that's commonly very slow. Now, with TypeScript being ported to Go, we had a tool in the ecosystem. It's called TSGoLint. It was made by one of the core team members of TypeScript ESLint, just as a proof of concept to say, okay, let's have a linter based on this TypeScript's native option. And he said, okay, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the time. Here's an example. You can do whatever you want with that, basically, but I don't want to. So we got in touch, said like, hey, we would be interested. Can we like fork that, work on that? And he even helped us further work on that. So AUV Red was the contributor's name. So like, okay, yeah, let's take a look. Even dedicated some more time. And eventually we have that integration called Oxlint-TSGoLint. That's in technical preview right now, which runs 40 type-aware rules. So the typical like ESLint rule set. And that's quite fast now. We're still improving the performance because Go is not necessarily an easy language. And they're like also basically shimming parts of the TypeScript Go API brings other challenges, but we're on that. And it's just nice that we have something that's like correct and that's working on top of TSGo. So really happy to see that. And also, of course,
it sounds like you guys are attacking this problem from a bunch of different angles. How are you guys determining which of these things is the priority? And it also like makes me a little bit curious. There's a lot of work going on in this space, and you guys are stepping into this and providing this overarching tool chain. Is it tricky to figure out like what pieces of this you guys are like carving off and going to take on next? And then once you do, like allocating that work, how are you guys managing that internally?
It definitely is tricky because, yeah, there's just not enough time in a day, right? But we all have that problem. I think in terms of what work to do, of course, we want to focus on making Rolldown production ready. So getting that stable and making that the default bundler in Vite. And for that, of course, sometimes we have to go a few levels deeper and etc. And at the same time, working on this unified toolchain to just make sure, okay, we have a wonderfully working linter. We have a formatter that's work in progress right now. Should be pretty compatible. It's also work in progress. And then seeing, okay, what does the community need? Once again, listening to the community, making sure people can voice their opinions. And then also see, okay, we have, of course, people dedicated to OXC and Oxlint, people dedicated to Rolldown, and then see what's actually possible. For example, there are a lot of things on the roadmap that might take a bit longer. Now we have type-aware linting that's in technical preview, so it's already working. We want to make it that stable, so better IDE integration, more tests, making sure that everything is actually fully correct, better performance, etc. But for example, one thing is custom component support, so supporting Svelte, Vue, Astro components, etc. That works partially in Oxlint, so you can lint the script part because, well, there's then just JavaScript and TypeScript, but the rest not really. Once again, custom templates, that's always a bit tricky. Same for everything that's not necessarily JavaScript or TypeScript, which is the focus right now, also including JSX and TSX. We do that, but we don't do any HTML or CSS or similar. So we have to really keep the scope a bit smaller and then say, okay, we can't tackle everything at once. Otherwise, in 5 years, it might be ready. And also they're iterating, seeing also what companies need. We work together with a lot of people trying things out, reaching out. There's also a contact form. It's like, hey, we have this big use case and we really struggle because our builds take ages. I think that's a perfect use case to see what problems are at large scale. And if you can fix them for a large scale, then it will most likely also work for a smaller scale. This is if done right.
Largely all open source tooling, and there's a lot of maintenance and stuff happening. How do you guys manage these projects that you're taking a much more active role in, becoming stewards of, and the existing communities there that are contributing externally? How's that relationship played out?
I think the relationships are pretty well. For Rolldown OXC, it's pretty clear that VoidZero is doing stewarding and governance there. Vite itself is in a way a multi-stakeholder project where you have people from different companies contributing. And in a way, I think that's great because the web ecosystem needs that. I think it would be really bad if there would be just hey, here's one company and we force all our opinions on that. I would say we are exactly the opposite, that we want to make sure people are heard and to make sure things work out. And of course, also V team members, the core VTest maintainer, they're on the payroll of VoidZero. But that doesn't mean that they just push our opinions or goals there. This is more to improve the whole thing at once.
You said that you take feedback from everybody who opens bug reports or brings up GitHub issues. And one of the ones that you take feedback from is the larger enterprise level applications or companies. So what are some of the bottlenecks that you've seen most often in those really big repos, and where can they get the most benefit from bringing Rolldown or Vite or different things into their build processes?
Yeah, I think the two common things are really long build processes, and the slow dev server. That's what we want to tackle with the full bundle mode, which is work in progress right now. So they're against the build time, we can do something at the moment. For the dev server time, that might take a little longer, but we're getting there. The other thing is definitely linting. And there are companies that do either of that, right? For example, Airbnb is not using Rolldown at all, but they switched to Oxlint to lint the check for barrel files, I think it is. So it's also totally fine to not use all of the tools, but hey, if you have a slow linting process, Posthoc, for example, also switched over to Oxlint. So, okay, this makes the company way more productive, all the developers, because I might have things in a pre-commit hook and I don't know, 30 seconds until things work, but just one. So it really depends on the use case, but I think the common thing is slow linting, most often type-aware linting related, but also not always. For example, barrel files and cyclical imports, still you have to check all the files to find out if maybe some files refer to each other in a cycle. So that's also something where Oxlint can help a lot. And I think, these are common use cases. So if you have anything that feels very slow, it might be worth to check what it is and how any of the tools can help.
Yeah, that's such a cool idea that even if you're not using every part of the unified toolchain that you guys are building, you can drag and drop the things that make the most sense for your project. So it's not one or all or nothing, I guess.
Yeah, of course, if you use one part, it might also make sense to switch over. But if you say, hey, no, we're happy with our toolchain there, then it's also fine to say hey, we pull in VTest in a project where we use, Webpack because we don't want to switch over. We don't have the time for that, but we want our tests to run faster. And it's also in a way of an incremental adoption. Okay, I pull a piece in here and maybe there, and at some point you may be able to switch fully. And it's also great because everything is open source, right? There are no strings attached. You can use all of that. It's MIT license, and it will stay like that.
Do you see any maybe barriers to entry getting a little bit bigger because so much of the JavaScript toolchain is being rewritten in Rust? Or do you think that there is still plenty of people for who are just JavaScript or TypeScript developers to get involved and contribute to the ecosystem?
I think it's contribution-wise, I'm personally pretty happy to see that OXC is a project where there's always that one story of someone who said, okay, I'll look into that. I want to learn Rust. And he became part of the core team. So I think all of these projects are very open for contributions and very friendly in a certain way. Of course, like if you maybe don't have a in-depth bundler knowledge, it might be difficult to contribute to Rolldown directly. But for example, for OXC, there's so many like isolated and well-scoped parts, it might be a bit easier. And the problem that like, okay, you'd write tools in a different language for the JavaScript ecosystem, that always comes down to like, hey, you might have less people to contribute, but also nowadays we're getting a bit of help with AI to having a first shot and a first draft and then iterate on that is already quite helpful. So I would say it could hamper contribution a little bit, but it doesn't make it necessarily impossible. And the other thing is, for example, with Oxlint and all the rules that are ported over as native rules, right? Because we have like over 500 ESLint rules and plugins ported over. So 500 rules from these plugins and all the native ESLint rules. You don't necessarily have to write your rules in Rust in the future, right? You can, in the future, use all the ESLint packages. Almost, right? We try to aim for an ESLint compatible API there, but it's still work in progress. But that's the idea, to also not avoid like, okay, now you can only use a tiny subset. No, if you have an own custom rule, you don't have to rewrite that in Rust, luckily. So there are also parts where we say, okay, we don't want that you write all your Rolldown plugins in Rust or Oxlint rules. Of course, there are parts that we want to port over because they might be very popular and also like perform way better on Rust. So that is just a good speed boost. But it's also good to just have an option for developers to do what they did before. And it's of course a difficult balance to keep the compatibility, but still make things quite performant, also with like multiple threads. But yeah, that's a whole topic on its own.
That's actually a great segue. I wanted to ask, like, there are so many ESLint rules that exist, as you just said. How do you kind of balance supporting them all, but also being as fast as you can to get through the rules and make sure that people's code bases are adhering correctly?
Yeah, I think the start was really like porting the popular rules over to Rust. That already helped quite a bit. Also with caching the AST on the Rust side, so making sure you don't have to parse files multiple times, that is helping a lot. And then with the upcoming custom JavaScript plugins, that will be really nice. So we don't have to like port every single rule over so people can use it. They can decide to do it. It might be slightly less performant, but then once again, if you have a rule that, for example, touches every file, ideally we can cover that. Or if it's like a rule that you write yourself, then you might live with the perf penalty. And it's not like it will just become 10 times slower. We also make sure this is optimized. In the start, it might be not as performant as will be at the end. We'll get things first going, a simple prototype out there. People can try it and then iterate on that, making things better and better. And I think that's in a way, a really good way to say, okay, we're still very performant. We're still better than your current setup. And from there, things get better. But first, you can also migrate over. So we don't keep you from like, okay, I have to wait until this is released, until the next version is more like, you can get it out, trying, and once again, give feedback, which shapes the direction a bit more.
You said that you are taking inspiration from Webpack, and Webpack is apparently taking inspiration from you, or different companies that are using it are. So is there a collaboration or a sense of competition between things like OXC and Biome and some of the other new up-and-comers who are getting into this ecosystem?
I would say, like, for example, OXC and Biome, we are in touch with the authors there. Biome actually even used the OXC resolver for a long time until they went another way, which is, of course, totally fine. So I don't think there's like any hostility in that sense. It's also open source eventually. And we're, of course, looking into what other people are doing and how that might be something that we can improve on our side. But I think that's the general way of open source, being inspired from each other, seeing what works. And in a way, I think the competition part is more interesting for benchmark to see, hey, what runs faster, for example, in terms of bundlers or also in terms of minifiers. There are really good benchmarks out there to see, okay, SWC provides quite a small bundle. They're really good at minification, and there's still some advanced optimization that we want to do. We can do it a bit faster, so that's another factor there. But it's always nice to be pushed a bit more, so to say.
Do you think that there's any sort of a path to a shared infrastructure or a convergence, or is it more beneficial to keep going down parallel paths, trying different things, and then learning from each other in that regard?
I think the part with the convergence will be more interesting in terms of adoption, because tools can be as good as they want to, right? We all still use a QWERTY keyboard, and we all adopted that in a certain way. So I think with that, just having Vite will be a big plus point for sure. But of course, ideally, we're building a unified JavaScript toolchain, also looking into Vite Plus for later this year, then to make sure, okay, it will be very easy and people don't have this like choice fatigue, which is, I don't know, a very common thing when, for example, I teach like JavaScript workshops. Okay, oh, you need this and you need launch of that and you need to have a build tool. And with Vite, it's already got easier, but it's like, okay, you need linting, you need formatting and this and that. Before you even write a single line of code, you have all this tooling set up. And it is painful. We're not even talking about things like monorepositories. We just talk about a very simple, like single repository for a single project. And having all of that just stripped away and saying, here's something that works, it integrates well with all frameworks, I think this would be the overall goal. And if you say, I don't know, I don't want to use your linter, I want to use something else or formatter, sure, go ahead. Like it's all open source. You can assemble it on your own as well. But we want to make sure that the end goal is to make it easy for people. Just, hey, I want to adopt everything. No problem. I have no headache and can just build my application.
That's excellent. Alexander, it's been great talking to you. Is there anything that we haven't really touched on yet that you want to make sure listeners are aware of?
I think we covered a lot of things from Vite over to Rolldown and OXC. I'm personally really interested in ViteConf coming up this autumn. So I'm really curious about the releases there. Can't spoil too much, but I think you might be too. So definitely check that out. And other than that, I think we got into all of it.
So when will ViteConf be happening for those who want to either attend or watch online if that's possible?
It will be possible, but of course, attending in person is always a different vibe. It is October 9th and 10th in Amsterdam, the Netherlands and Europe. And I can just say, like, we have a really amazing lineup from like Tanner Lindsley, Rich Harris, Avenue, of course, a lot of people from VoidZero, from different companies giving feedback on using Rollup in the wild. So for example, Framer, Linear will be there. Yeah, the agenda is pretty packed and I think there's something for everyone there. So definitely worth checking out at ViteConf.amsterdam.
All right, Alex, thank you again for joining us. If people want to get in touch with you to learn more about Rolldown or talk about Vite or anything else, where's the best place to find you online?
I think the best place is Blue Sky and Twitter. So I'm there at the Alex Lichter on Twitter, and Blue Sky is thealexlichter.com. Otherwise, yeah, follow the Rolldown and VoidZero accounts for all the updates. We also post blog posts regularly on VoidZero Dev. I think, yeah, these are the best channels. And of course, if you want to get in touch and chat about features, bugs, whatever, then join the Discords as well for Rolldown or for OXC and for Vite, of course, as well, whatever you're interested in. Hope to see you there. I'm also around chatting regularly.
Fantastic.
I find it so tricky to like keep up on everything that's going on, especially in the build toolchain. And I feel like most devs probably have this experience because it's not a thing that's usually top of your mind all the time until there's something annoying and then you go and you look for a solution and then like you get in there, oh my gosh, there's so much that's changed. Do I like revamp my whole project and do this? So I think it's cool hearing that there's so much interoperability work going on. Do you fully buy this? Have you gone through this kind of process on a project recently where you've tried to extract a piece of it or change the bundler or the linter, like anything in particular?
I honestly haven't, and I should. It's like you start a project and then you probably, for a lot of people, you work on that project for years. So whatever defaults the project came with when you initially get initted that repo and spun it up, that's probably where it's going to stay, unless, like you said, there's some massive breaking change that takes down everything that you were working on. And I, and probably most developers, are not very good at going back and updating things after the fact, unless I know that there's going to be some big performance improvement that comes from it, or Next.js is pushing me into it for some reason. So I really should, because I think that there would be some performance improvements as Oxlint, bringing that in to do linting faster would be great. Doing a lot of that faster would probably be really good. I just haven't taken the time because technical debt is something that we always just push off and don't worry about until you really can't push it off any longer.
And I feel like this kind of variant of technical debt that is only or primarily, I guess, painful to you as the developer, especially if you're in a project where like your time or just like mental energy is already stretched very thin. That tends to be the thing that ends up getting kicked down the road. So yeah, it's tricky. I think there's also a part of that where it's like once a seasoned front-end engineer recognizes the potential to get overhyped and switch tools when something's still the shiny new toy. Do you feel like we're in that realm a little bit here? Or do you think we are established? Personally, I don't feel like Vite's going anywhere, but I do wonder if some of these, like the other parts of the whole kind of tool chain here may or may not be the right place to jump in, like before stuff may or may not get switched out. Where do you think we're at on this arc overall?
I think that VoidZero has a lot more credibility than other companies might because Evan is behind it and Evan created Vite. and everybody loves Vite in the entire JavaScript ecosystem. So I think that they are in a good position. And if they can continue to produce high quality pieces of the tool chain and really make those as compatible with everybody's setup as they can, that this might have some real staying power. But at the same time, we've seen what's happened to other companies like Rome going down, becoming Biome, rising again from the ashes. So it's still early days. I will say that. And Webpack's just been around forever. So Webpack is never going to disappear from the world like jQuery. It will just be there forevermore on the internet. But I want to be optimistic. Rust is a language that a lot of us have never explored or really thought about. And now it's finding its new life being rebuilt for JavaScript tools. If it really does do as well as people seem to think it does, then I'm all for it.
I'm skeptical that anything that would ever like majorly overhaul like rule definitions themselves would ever usurp lint rules and even configs. So I think targeting just like full kind of compatibility with the API seems reasonable. And then if we're at that point, like maybe it's not that big a deal to switch tools. So I'm just going to point whatever it is at my files and it'll work. So like I don't think that there's a huge risk there. So part of me is like, there's some of that early adoption fear, but as we were talking about, at least anecdotally for me, I feel like I'm messing with this stuff less and less as time goes on. I'll just pick a tool and it'll usually just do the thing. It's an interesting thing. Like there's a little bit of the fear of being an early adopter, but if all it takes to switch down the road is like change a value in a file, I don't feel like I've really wasted a bunch of time here.
Yeah, you npm install one thing and uninstall another, and it just continues to work. That's like the web development dream.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that we're going to continue down that path? Are you optimistic on that front as well, or do you think we'll ebb and flow? Because I think like in some facets it's happening, like some stuff's getting easier, but at the same time we have the shift back to like server-side rendering and all this stuff, like making this complicated again in a whole different aspect than I think anyone was really thinking about. Are you optimistic that we'll get to a point where it's all a little bit more unified and interoperable, or do you think we'll kind of ebb and flow like forever?
I hope that we're going to go towards more of the unified toolchain, because I do remember the days of Webpack, and I remember Gulp, and I remember
Grunt.
Grunt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anybody who's lived through that knows what a pain it was when anything changed or those just broke because some dependency got upgraded. So if you've had that experience in the past, I think you'll continue to want it to be just as easy and under the covers as you can. But, with the new crop of web developers coming up and getting into it who maybe haven't experienced or lived through that pain, they might want to be more hands-on with their config. But personally, I want to see things in the browser, on the screen. I want to be building those really cool experiences. I don't really care about what's happening in the config underneath, just as long as my build runs and builds and deploys. Like everything else to me is less important. I just want to build cool experiences. So the faster that I can do that and with the less me having to think about it, that's really my sweet spot.
I agree. I'm optimistic too. And again, I feel like a lot of the teams working on the tools we're discussing here in particular have shown making good faith efforts to make everything interoperable and easy and like kind of pursuing that path with a lot of energy. It's self-serving for them because like they want buy-in and it's an easy way to do it. And that's also super nice for the devs then, because you're not tied to a tool once you've established an API standard. If we decide to start using a different tool under the hood for linting, back to my example, it's like not that big a deal to switch. So I'm pretty optimistic as well.
Yeah, they have a great track record. They've already been delivering in big ways and proving out performance for a lot of companies who are being early adopters and trying it out. So I think that they are onto something, and I hope that the good momentum continues and the community support continues. But yeah, this could be a good step forward for all of the JavaScript community.
We just need that mono repo tooling and I'll be all in. I'm ready for it. But yeah, no, I'm optimistic as well. So yeah, this is a good one. It was fun. It was fun chatting on it.